Hi everyone, this is Alan McKay and welcome to episode 173. I'm speaking with Gini Santos, one of the animation supervisors at Pixar. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Alan McKay Podcast. Alan is an Emmy Award-winning visual effects artist and mentor to many leading industry experts. Listen in as Alan talks with other industry leaders in film, video games, and visual effects about their experience, lessons, and methodology. Alan will teach you pivotal advice to fast-track your career, better your skills, and reach your ultimate dream job. Check out the latest episodes on alanmckay.com.
Okay, so I'm really excited for this episode. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. We cover a lot of really great content throughout this episode with Gini. I want to make this intro short and sweet and get right into it. If you want to check out the show notes, go to alanmckay.com/173 and you'll be able to look at all the key insights, quotes, links and resources to everything that we discuss and so much more. So check it out there. Finally, I've got some new courses and training and other great stuff coming up. A lot of free tutorials and other really awesome opportunities to jump on. So if you want to get on my Inner Circle email list, which is where 90% of my content is put out for free, go to alanmckay.com/inside to sign up there. That being said, let's dive in. Great. Well, again, thanks for taking the time to chat. And do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. My name is Gini Santos. I'm an animator at Pixar.
Cool. Awesome. And we're just chatting about this a second ago, but I was kind of curious, like, how you got started. Did you always want to be an artist growing up? Like, as a kid, did you always say, like, all right, step one, grow up, step two, become an artist and start working on movies?
I think I was born an artist only because it was not something I think I really had to give too much of a thought. I grew up drawing a lot as a kid, and I just remember stacks of kind of paper flying around in the living room with just all the drawings of whatever I was currently interested in. I think there was a time I thought I wanted to be a marine biologist because all I ever drew were like underwater scenes. But I did love to draw, and I knew as I grew older I wanted to take fine arts. When I was old enough to understand that, I was going to go to school, go to college, and I was going to have to pick kind of a course, I knew I wanted to be an artist and I wanted to take fine arts. And that was interesting because I grew up in an era where, my parents felt like art wasn't going to be lucrative. In our culture in the Philippines especially, they're like, you either were a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, something safe. So my dad was never really kind of on board about me becoming and taking fine arts. I think he imagined me like selling paintings in the park. And although he wasn't truly against it, he was trying to kind of find a middle ground of like, because my parents were both accountants. My dad was a banker and my mom became an executive secretary, but I know they came from accounting background, and they wanted something where I could be kind of part of a business course to just know I could survive. And so at that time, we actually kind of met halfway, and that's where I ended up taking advertising arts.
Cool.
So it was a fine arts course, but I majored in advertising arts, and my dad was like, okay, cool, that sounds like there could be a job mixed with that. And so I went home. I actually grew up on Guam. My family had migrated. We were actually on our way to Dallas, I believe, Texas.
Okay.
But we ended up staying on Guam when I was 3, and I grew up there. So when the time came for me to go back, to go to high school, college, my parents sent us back to the Philippines. And that's where I took fine arts at the University of Santo Tomas in the Philippines, major in advertising arts. And, to be honest, even though it was kind of an agreement to kind of meet halfway. I was actually very interested in advertising arts in the advertising course, because I thought it was interesting how when I read books about advertising back then, and that was, in the late 70s, early 80s, there was, advertising involves a lot of, what do you call this, kind of psychology.
Right.
And so I thought that was interesting, designing to kind of convince people to do things or think a certain way. So long story short, I ended up graduating with a major in advertising arts. I thought I would work in the States, but to kind of just appease my parents, I went home first and I worked on Guam in an advertising agency. The agency I worked at, which was Bush and Bishop Advertising, which doesn't exist anymore, one of the owners had passed away a long time ago and the business just closed down. But at the time that I had worked in advertising on Guam, on Guam you're a big fish in a small pond, and I got to do a lot of designing that normally you wouldn't be able to do in the advertising agency unless you were much older. I'd read about the big advertising grades. But on Guam, I got to do a lot of logo design, package design. I worked my way to becoming the art director in the art room. But interestingly enough, in the 90s, and that's when I was working for them, desktop publishing was exploding onto the scene. The personal computer was kind of, coming up as far as kind of this new technology, and I had read a lot about it. And the first time I saw a Mac was a class I took about you could learn how to paint on a computer, and it was a Mac. I believe it was a Classic, and it was very jagged, but I was blown away at the concept of that. My gosh, you're going to paint on the computer. So I remember reading a lot about the Macintosh and how that was kind of starting to become a tool in creating art and doing layout. And so I convinced my boss to get one for the art department. At that time in advertising, usually when you're designing anything, whether it's print, collateral material, usually you had to design it and then you sent it out. You had a typesetter company you went to, you had to send out to get photos. The computer kind of was a promise that you can do some of this stuff in-house, and my boss kind of was very supportive, and we started to do a lot more in-house. But I knew I wanted to move on and start thinking about working for the bigger agency, so I felt like for me to break into the bigger agencies in the States, I said maybe I should go back to school, go back to advertising and get like a master's course. But at the same time, because of my experience with using the computer, there was a part of me now that was starting to bug me about, there's something about the computer I feel like I need to learn more of, because it's obviously such a part of kind of the workplace now. Even though quite limited at that time, it did have a lot of promise. And I had already applied to Syracuse University. They had an MFA in advertising. But the weird thing was, at the same time, I discovered a course at the School of Visual Arts in New York City about that time. I think that was in 1994. And they had a Master of Fine Arts in Computer Art. And I thought that was interesting. And what kind of drew me to it was this little program, and I say little because it just seemed unique as far as what it was. They really encouraged a very diverse, population of students. I think they were giving, they were really trying to invite students from all around the world. And I felt like, hey, I have a good chance because I come from this island called Guam, which I feel like most people have never heard of. So I ended up enrolling in the MFA computer art course, and they had 3 specialties, and one of it was computer animation. So there was computer animation, there was an internet course. This was when HTML was just starting out.
Yep.
And then the third one was extended forms. And I felt like anything that was kind of any art form on the computer fell under that. And it was interesting how I believe SVA was the first school that thought, what can artists create on the computer? And they really felt that the computer was a new tool that could make art. And I remember even meeting another student. She was working part-time writing HTML. And at that time, I mean, she was making good money making that. And she says, oh, man, when people find out how easy it is to do HTML, this is going to become cheap. So that's when I first saw computer animation, animation on the computer. And they had, I believe it was soft image and waveform alias. And I had done some 2D animation in my art school, but I was never drawn to it because I felt as an artist I was always about the one image, and 2D animation was just a lot of drawings.
Right.
But I grew up on animation. But when I kind of saw this and said a computer will do the in-betweens, I thought, wow, this is amazing. So I went I specialized in the animation side and learned animation on soft image. And it just blew me away. But I never really knew where I was headed with it. As a matter of fact, it was also interesting to me, and it was like this whole new world had opened up, and I just was kind of, like a sponge, trying to absorb everything so exciting about this whole new medium. And it wasn't until the second year or mid-year, because it was a 2-year MFA course, that I saw Toy Story. The original Toy Story came out in
95, right?
94, yes, 95. And I remember going with a bunch of my classmates, and it was only then that it kind of clicked into place. Like, oh my God, this is what I can do. I can do animation, but this time it's going to be on the computer. And so I remember Pixar doing a visit. These workplaces would come to the schools and do talks and stuff. And I just remember saying, I really want to try after I saw Toy Story. And when I had graduated, there were computer companies, animation, like film computer-generated companies then, but a lot of them are really making more kind of ads, commercials.
Yep.
And I just said, there was, I believe in New York, there was R. Greenberg and Associates. And then the more famous ones were on the East Coast, like Lucasfilm, Skywalker Studio.
Oh, on the
Blue
West Coast?
Sky.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, in the West Coast. I'm sorry.
No.
And
I was
you're
just thinking,
Blue
like, the only
Sky.
thing around you was, like, Blue Sky up in New York State.
Yes, Blue Sky, and there was one in the city I remember called R. Greenberg. I don't think they really did anything kind of character for them, but they were using the computer to some degree. Mm-hmm. By the time I graduated, yes, there was Blue Sky. On the West Coast, there was Industrial Light and Magic, Skywalker Studios. There was PDI, and I actually interviewed with Blue Sky first. And after I had seen Toy Story, to me, I kind of looked at, Pixar as like, oh my God, that's the place. But I didn't think I could get in. So I had sent a reel and resumes out to a lot of these other companies. But for some reason in my head, I felt like, no way is going to Pixar take me. So when I sent them a reel, it was almost kind of like just doing it for the heck of it, knowing I wasn't going to get hired. So I sent a reel, and I didn't even have like a resume with it. But I had, contact information. And I remember I went and interviewed at Blue Sky. I had gone to the West Coast to interview with PDI. And then I remember meeting with Skywalker or Industrial Light and Magic at one of the electronic film festivals, I believe. That was in, gosh, I can't remember. I think it was Seagrass when it was in LA. But Pixar didn't call me till like months after all my interviews, and they said, hey, we got your reel. We're not really sure what you're applying for, but it looks like you're applying for animation. And they're like, we'd love to get more information from you. And so I sent my reel, I sent my resume, and sure enough, they invited me to come over and interview. And I remember having to kind of delay my decision with the other companies, because it was like, oh my God, I've got to give Pixar a chance. And so I remember flying to Pixar, and they were still in Point Richmond. And I was being walked around. I probably have to say this is probably one of the most unforgettable job interviews, because I got to meet Steve Jobs.
Wow.
And they were in Point Richmond. I remember being walked around by the HR person. Her name is Rachel. And we had passed a room that had Steve Jobs' nameplate in the front. And I just remember as we walked in, I kind of peeked in, and the room was absolutely empty other than a desk, a leather couch, and then somewhere in the corner somewhere, I remember a stack of Odwalla water. You know how Steve Jobs is very kind of vegetarian, vegan, and
yeah, right.
And I just kind of went, oh my God, this Steve Jobs office. And the reason I knew Steve Jobs was growing up, my mom would tell me the story about this guy who started a computer company out of his garage, and she always used that example of you can do anything you want if you really have the interest in it. And she's like, look at this guy, started his company in his garage. And so I knew who Steve Jobs was. And I just remember going, oh, wow, the Steve Jobs office. And Rachel, the HR, goes, yeah, you want to meet him? And I said, oh, no. I mean, I was very kind of very self-deprecating of oh, no, I mean, who am I? No, I don't need to meet, him. And she's like, no, you should meet him. And so she takes me back to her office, and she kind of sits me near her desk. She's like, you wait here and I'll get him. And I just remember being really crazy nervous, because, Apple to me at that time was kind of well, they were, as far as the computer for the artist, I just remember this is just an amazing product, amazing company.
It's like meeting someone who invented the paintbrush.
Exactly, and so I remember after that waiting, which felt like forever, she walks in and Steve Jobs is just right behind her. And he kind of comes up to me and he puts his hand out and he goes, hi, my name is Steve Jobs. And I said, hi, I'm Gini Santos. And he shakes my hand. And, it's a firm shake, and he doesn't immediately release my hand. And he goes, where are you from? And I said, currently I live in Manhattan. And he said, oh, Manhattan. He goes, that's not the place to be. You want to be here. He goes, this is where it's happening. He goes, everything in the Bay Area now. He goes, you watch. And he said something really profound. He goes, you're like a young plant right now, and we want to guide you to grow into a big, strong tree.
Wow.
And I just remember going, I had had a few interviews prior to that, and I just go, no one's talked to me this way. He was just kind of so profound in the way he said anything. And it wasn't about, what can I do? What can I offer? It was kind of he was just talking about character and what they were about as a company, and how they, as an artist, what they could offer from me, and what I could be being a part of it. And that was pretty much it. I was just kind of stuck in that. My head was going back and forth in what he was saying. And, I don't even remember what happened. I know I met with a bunch of people, but I just remember flying home excited to be able to call my mom and tell her, oh my God, I'm never going to wash my hand, Mom. I met Steve Jobs and I shook his hand. And so There was no question about where I was going to go. I knew I was going to go with them because of Toy Story. And I'll be honest, they weren't even, their pay offer wasn't anything even worth thinking about.
Wow, okay.
They were actually the lowest one, yeah. And so that's kind of how I ended up there, and that was in 96.
Yeah, that's so amazing. I mean, like, all of it is really amazing. And I think that that's pretty profound too, that I guess after going to so many job interviews and every single one of them being more transactional, they're more interrogating you to see what you can do for them, and to have someone, especially someone so iconic and influential, kind of signal to you that they want to invest in you and they want to help you grow. And that, I think, in a lot of ways is you know, a huge contrast to everything else. That's amazing.
The statement they basically made, was I understood, was, we know you're an artist. We already trust you on that part.
That's great.
You know, and that, yeah.
So just going back a bit to you kind of hesitating to apply at Pixar. And by the way, I'll just say that, like, it's so interesting to hear so many people who have that relationship with wanting to be an artist, but of course wanting to also find a stable career. And especially back in like the 90s and early 2000s, I think for a lot of people it was very alien having that. So it's very much like a common reoccurring thing on this podcast to hear that. But for you, I guess, like, you had a lot of hesitations with applying for Pixar initially, just because it's kind of like, oh, you know, I'm not at that level yet, or that's kind of the pipe dream. Whereas you're applying everywhere else, and like, I find it kind of interesting too, because I've had those moments early in my career where I sent out a reel more as a gimmick, you know, just to see if I'd get a rejection letter, rather than expecting, you know, them to call me back, and that, you know, is one, you know, they're the kind of things that I can look back at as being a very monumental point in my career, that if I didn't do that as a gag, then, you know, I would have taken the slow path to where I would have been, instead of like taking those big hurdles. So I guess for you, like, do you look at that a lot, where it's like, you know, we have those hesitations where it's like, we're not worthy of it? Like, I think it's pretty good for you to be able to say screw it and still throw caution to the wind and do something that you've got your heart set on, even though you mightn't get the results that you expect.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, you know, I think about that a lot. Like, there was an aspect of my thinking back then where I was like, screw it, you know, this just sounds like an adventure. I'm going to jump in and do this. I had my plan on, you know, breaking into the huge advertising industry that's so hard to break into. But then was totally sidetracked by this thing. And I think my hesitation in applying at Pixar was at the same time that the unknown kind of drew me into something that was so exciting. There was also a part of me that's like, but I'd never done it before, and I don't know if I could give them what they're looking for. Because if it were a company that said, we need a designer who could think of ads or a campaign or identity, I would be almost bold about it, because I had done that and I was aware of it. But to all of a sudden go, well, I am an artist, but an artist on the computer, I wasn't really sure what that meant. Mm-hmm. And the first thing, just watching Toy Story, you know, it just blew me away. I mean, it blew everyone away. You know, the first ever animated, computer-generated animation, and I just felt like, can I do that? You know, and I think that's kind of what it was. But at the same time, there was the excitement of the unknown. And even though I was kind of on the surface going, oh, no, you know, I couldn't do that. Oh, no, I couldn't meet Steve Jobs. You know, internally, I was just kind of like always moving forward, kind of more drawn to it. Mm-hmm. And I realize now, you know, and I realize now that back then, that really gave me the energy to move forward, versus now I feel like I'm so set in my ways and I'm set at Pixar that I actually have more fears trying to move forward, because I feel like here I am. But at the same time, in doing a lot of talks now and going to schools, I realize that I was carried by a wave of something new back then, and I was riding that wave into where I was, and now that wave's kind of, I feel like, has washed over me, and I'm still chasing it, but I'm kind of behind it because the technology is just changing so quickly.
Mm. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's, by the way, forgive me, I'm running on 2 hours sleep, so I'm a little bit tongue-tied. So, yeah, but I do think it's interesting because I've kind of recently fallen into that a little bit too, where I've been doing this for about 20-something years, and I find that I always look back to how I was in the early 90s, where I actually started looking up on YouTube the other day old documentaries on CGI, and for me, I look at how I was at 14, 15, and just being obsessed with this new technology, this new thing. And, you know, it was so rare back then that if a movie had CG in it, I'd want to go see it just because it had, you know, that in it. And when Toy Story came out, that was the first time I could ever point to my friends and say, that's the kind of stuff that I do. And, you know, that's the kind of stuff that I want to do as well down the line. And, you know, whereas now, like, I look at it all and I just wonder whether it's the industry has changed or whether it's just more that you're so oversaturated with it that, you know, the fascination's gone away. But, you know, I think that in the beginning, at least for me, I was very obsessed with it and excited about it. Whereas now, doing it for so long, it's more kind of like, you know, it's a job, you know. So I think that in a lot of ways, like, I'm hoping that it's not a generation thing, that it's more early in your career, you're excited about this stuff and you want to tackle it, and later on you get comfortable, but you also you know, have a more stable career and have put in the hard times everywhere, so you don't need to do that. So I don't know, it's definitely interesting though, kind of looking at that. For you though, I guess, like, again, having set that bar really high of like Pixar is like the one day, the someday goal, what was it like going there, and like, let's say on your first day, and just in general, like, going to work at your dream job?
Well, I think back then, I couldn't define it as my dream job, because usually your dream job, you're like, it had been something you had been thinking about for a long time. I guess you could say I thought that it's an amazing job that I got into, but it was just weird. Like, at the same time, like, I don't know what it is. Like, I was just going to learn. And I knew the only thing that was going to carry me was the fact that I was creative and I was an artist, and I was going to apply that, because that's the only thing that really carried me, was the attitude of like, wait, the computer is like a new medium, like a new tool, like a pencil. Okay, I'm going to just go and apply everything that I would usually do if I were sketching something or painting something, but I was going to do it on the computer. When I started at Pixar, you know, they were just starting working on Bug's Life. You know, Toy Story happened, and there was actually at that time like two teams that had come up. There was the original team that had done Toy Story, and then there were the newer teams that they had hired, because at that time they were coming up with a direct-to-video Toy Story. And what happened was, it was kind of like there was like an A and B team. There was the A team, which was the original team and feature animation, and then there was the B team, the people who had just gotten hired. And you know, to me, I was just excited to be there and to learn. And we were trained to work on the computer. And, you know, in hindsight, it was amazing to watch. And, you know, our little animation department back then, you know, when I started, I believe there was only like 250 people. And back then people were saying, oh my God, we're getting bigger. I remember when we were 50. But our little animation department consisted of animators that came from all walks of life. We had the animators that came from Cal Arts and had 2D kind of background experience, but we also had, because the computer was kind of this medium that was new, it also attracted people who wanted to do animation on the computer, but were either like, I remember we had one animator, I believe his name is Jeff, who worked, I think he was the one who worked at NASA. there was another one that was an accountant. Like, it was like this one moment in time where this new thing was being defined, and we all had an interest in animation, and then there was this new medium that it was being created on. And in hindsight now, I look back at that time. We were like this team trying to figure out, what does 2D animation mean on the computer, and we were figuring it out as we went. And we always had kind of traditional animation to guide us. But we were still kind of trying to define the process on the computer. And I realize now, compared to these days, back then there was nothing. There were no schools. There was nothing that really offered, a course in teaching computer animation. I mean, the school I had come from was really about learning about how to use the computer and the software on it. And so I remember when we were doing reference videos, we had to really videotape ourselves because there was nothing. Now, you compare it to now, there's YouTube. It's so easy to find reference on almost anything. There's classes online that teach computer animation, and the software has gotten better. And it really, where I am now, really makes me look back and appreciate those days when I first started, because even though it felt like, whoa, this is so high tech, what we were about to do, there was so many limitations about it at the same time that allowed us to be creative in so many ways, or to just go, well, that's the best we can do, but, we're doing our best and it looks great, right? We're always driven by traditional animation and the principles of animation. And as the company grew, technology got better. There was a time when art and kind of science were very separate. And now that's kind of crossed over. Like, we're hiring more technical people who are very artistic, and we're hiring very artistic people who are very technical. Our tools have gotten better. You can do anything. Like, the world is your oyster now. It almost seems that sometimes there's too much options. And I think where I'm at now compared to where I was then is that back then it was this exciting, like, oh, I want to learn more about this and I want to apply my art, right? And now it's like, oh my God, there's so many things I can do and so many ways to do it, that it's really coming down to, is the concept good? Right. I think where I'm at now, and I'm sure it sounds like with how you told me your background is, I'm kind of a place now where I'm trying to find my creativity again. Mm-hmm. I think I've kind of lost it in a way where when we were limited, we were just always trying to make it about the art of animation, no matter what the limitations are. And now there are kind of no more limitations. Every time the technology got better, that kind of upped our concept and the stories and the complication. It never really felt like we caught up with the needs of what our stories called for, because either the computer was slow or we just couldn't do certain things. But every time we upped the bar, we also upped what we called for in our stories. And so it just never felt like it caught up, But I'm at a place now where although I appreciate all the amazing stuff at Pixar, and we still do make films that tell a good story, I'm just trying to find the simplicity of my art again, because it's easy to get lost in just kind of the details of so many things you can do now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Like, it's very overwhelming now to I used to tell people that I don't really keep up with hardware. If people ask me, like, what kind of computer should I buy, because I'm like, there's someone out there who's nerding out about that stuff, and I can just go to them and find it out. And I feel that that's the way with like computer art in general now, that there's so much technology coming out all the time that it's very hard to kind of be able to keep on top of it. Before it was, do you use Softimage or Maya? And now it's like there's a billion tools and a billion little things that do one little thing perfectly. So you definitely have this very segregated industry that keeps growing and spawning new areas like VR, AR, MR, feature films, TV, video games. So it's definitely diversifying, and I think that if anything, that just kind of shows the peak that it's at. That it's at a point where it isn't such a specialized industry. It's now something that is mainstream. You can print cars, you can do so much with it. So like I had IKEA reaching out to me because they want to streamline a lot of what they're doing over in Sweden in terms of marketing and a lot of other things. They've got like a big team of people over there, and it's just like every industry has this. Whereas you going back to the 90s, like whether or not this would be a viable career to go into, and it's just like, well, now it's flourishing in so many different ways. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's very saturated, but also very kind of open-ended now, which can be overwhelming in itself. So
really, yeah, it's true. And I remember when we were using computers in the art department at the advertising agency I was working in, I was like, oh my God, things are going to start going in-house. Mm-hmm. Big companies aren't even going to need agencies because they're going to want to save money and have their own in-house art department. And things that we were doing by hand, creating a print piece, the rubber cement glue and assembling everything. I mean, it's all done on the computer now. I mean, people are doing their own taxes because you can. You don't have to really go to an accountant. And it's kind of crazy because I know that I still love the kind of the creativity of design, being an artist. And I had a friend of mine who introduced me to this couple here in the Bay Area, and they have like a bee farm. And they asked me if I would design a logo for them, and I said sure. And I mean, that was just such an old school thing that I hadn't done in so long.
Yeah.
But I remember when I did it, I really loved it, and I was like, oh my God! I'm like, I love designing, and I'm like, maybe I should go back to graphic design just to kind of, see. And it just blew me away when I kind of peaked, and I'm like, wait. Graphic design now is so different. Back then, you basically just had to know the weight of the paper, the type of paper, and then the colors, the print, the Pantone colors. Like now you have to know things and terms on the computer, as far as web colors and like, oh my God, I can't even go back to just being a graphic designer because I could, but I literally have to go back to school to learn about what these new tools that are being used and the new platforms and the new mediums it's being used as, because print isn't really something that's that popular anymore. Yeah,
it's definitely changed. I mean, you're right too. Like even saving as file formats, like suddenly people are going to be like, use the PNG, or no, you got to use a TIFF for this, and like things have definitely kind of changed over time. I still think of like PCX images and all the old file formats that people never even heard of these days, But yeah, I mean, I've got I guess not a theory, but like I've started feeling this a lot lately that I think at the very beginning, no matter what you're doing, you kind of start as a generalist. You're learning everything, you're absorbing everything, but bit by bit, you kind of specialize or kind of get put into one category as you kind of move up through management. And eventually I kind of feel like it kind of arcs back around. Like, at a certain point, you kind of stop being such a specialist and start to relearn everything again. And at least for me, like I'm finding in so many different parts of my career, I'm kind of going back to the basics where I might have been doing effects for a long time or a lot of on-set souping. And now it's kind of like, I just want to have fun, be an artist and do things that I haven't done in like 20 years. And I think that in a lot of ways, a lot of my friends who, kind of relate to that too, where you have this arc where you kind of end up back where you were, but obviously with a lot more experience behind you, but you kind of fall in love with what you're doing and just want to explore all of it again and utilize it all rather than, being so strict about like that one thing that you do. But I think it's so cool. And I just got one or two more questions, but I was kind of curious, like what to date is probably your most favorable project to work on?
My most favorable? Well, let's see. I've been fortunate enough to, have a hand in a lot of the Pixar films. But as we grew and the frequency of our films coming out, we're getting, the gaps were getting closer and closer. There was a point where I had to, all the animators, we were starting to leapfrog. There was a time when when the company wasn't that big, and we made a film together, and then we jumped on the next one together. Now we were starting to leapfrog, and then when I started to get into a lead role, and when you're in a lead role, usually you're involved in very early stages of the film, and I know you know all this with your experience. So usually you're in a project for anywhere between 3 to 5 years. At one point, some of our projects, like Ratatouille, I believe that went on for 10 years with the story changes and stuff. So I was doing a lot of leadership pre-production stuff, and I hadn't been kind of just an animator for a long time, and it was exciting, but then as I moved on to more films, like Coco was my biggest project as far as a lead, because I was one of the supervising animators, and it was just a really big film. I just realized after that I'm like, wow, I really miss animating. And I also got to see as a supervising animator, like, wow, the concerns we used to have as animators way back are not the concerns of these newer, younger animators we have, who are very talented because the tools are so different. It was, for me, like, what I enjoy the most about what I do is the character animation, is the character part of it. My most favorite project to this date, and this is as an animator, is Finding Nemo, and only because I realized that in becoming an animator that tells story through film, I'm drawn to character-driven stories, and Dory has always been, I feel like, one of our most kind of amazing character design as far as who this fish is, because she can't remember anything after 5 minutes, right. And so that kind of like a character quirk to drive what is going to happen to that character, I realized was always so interesting to me, and she was kind of always one of my most favorite characters to date. Like, I know we have a lot of cool characters, but Dory has always been kind of the epitome for me of like a really interesting character. And I found too that in animation, now I've been in this industry for a little over 20 years, having been at Pixar, that I'm really more drawn to the kind of the character, not so much maybe the beauty of the animation itself, but kind of the characters that drive us to a story. Sometimes I won't even care where the story takes me, and the character is really interesting enough. Yeah. I want to follow it. So, and we have quite a few characters in our films. Obviously, we really try to work those things out. But I just remember Dory always being near and dear to my heart as far as the one of our films that has been a favorite project of mine.
That's so awesome. That's really cool. And I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I think this has been really great just to kind of get a lot of insight into your whole career, as well as, of course, at Pixar too. Again, I just want to thank you for taking the time to chat. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored just to share my story and to know that someone actually wants to hear it. So thank you so much for having me on, Alan. I really appreciate it.
No problem, and looking forward to catching up in Paris in March.
Yes, we should definitely connect. I'd like to meet you.
Absolutely. Okay, I want to thank Gini for taking the time to chat. I had a blast, and I'm sure there's a lot of really great key takeaways that all of us can get from this episode. Now, I'll be back next week with some solo episodes coming up. I'm really excited to get into one that I've been wanting to do for quite a while, which is the entrepreneur's mindset. So as artists, having that hustler's mindset and going beyond that into building out businesses and being able to monetize your talents. So I think there's going to be a lot of really great insights in this episode, the final episode for 2018. And 2019 is going to be a killer year. I'm so excited for it. So many great things coming up. I hope you've had a great year. And I might do some bonus episodes soon reflecting on 2018 because it's definitely been an interesting year. So I'll be back next episode with more great stuff. Until then, if you can take a moment to share this episode, it would mean the world to me. I love doing this podcast because of the impact it's had on so many people. At the same time, I not only do this for free, it's actually quite expensive to run doing all of this. And the only thing that I do ask in return is if you can take a moment to share this podcast. So if you're on Facebook or LinkedIn, just share the episode, or from the show notes page. If you're on your mobile phone right now, you can take a screenshot and post it on Instagram, whatever you want to do, but it would mean the world to me. Feel free to tag me as well. I'd love to see your posts. So that would mean the world to me. Like I said, this is a completely non-profit podcast. I do this because, again, it's a chance to give back to the industry and help others as much as I can. And for me, that's so rewarding. So if you can take a moment to share this with others, that would be the ultimate Christmas present for me. So I'll be back next episode. Have an amazing holiday season. Set some goals for next year because it's coming fast. I'll be back soon. Rock on.